there we go. We'll go ahead and skip the warm up for today and jump right into things, just so that we have enough time for questions if we do have any questions. But so we got an empty project here, and to start off with, we're going to initialize the project, same as any other project. That we're going to open up a terminal, and we're going to do npm init-y, and that'll set us up with a package.json. Now that we've got a package.json file, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to set up a backend server. We're trying to set up an Express server that's going to be able to serve us up data from like our APIs. So what we can do is we can do npm install Express, and that will bring us the necessary packages to start up our API server. So we've got Express. We've got this node modules here, which has all the packages necessary for Express. And now that we've got that, we'll go ahead and create a new file, and we'll go ahead and call this app.js. And generally by convention, we've seen an app.js and we've seen a server.js. Generally, it's good to make this distinction by having app.js contain like the actual application or the actual thing that runs like your backend server, or that has like the definitions of all the routes for your backend server, and have server.js be the file that helps you run that server, so that you could take app.js and put that anywhere else that you might need. Like, for example, if you were running tests, that you could just take whatever you need from app.js and run your tests against that without having to actually start up the full server. And you've seen that pattern before in like some of the exercises. It's a common pattern like across development on the back end with Express. So now that we've got Express installed, what we can do is, and I'm going to go ahead and make this type module, just because I like using the new style of imports module. Save that. Go back to app.js, and we'll do import Express from Express. And then from here, we'll do const app is equal to Express. And then not get that. And from now, we're just going to go ahead and do res.send, and we'll do res.json because we want to send some JSON data. Message, hello world. And then from there, we can do export default app, so that we have access to use this anywhere else we might need. We'll go to server.js and we'll import app from /app. We'll do app.listen on port, like let's say 1337. And in our callback, we'll say, all right, once we have a server running, we'll console.log that the server is running on http://localhost 1337. Save that. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and go to package.json. And let's also add a little bit of a tool that's going to help us do development a little bit more efficiently. We'll do npm install -- save dev nodemon. And what that'll do is it'll save nodemon as a development dependency for our project, meaning that nodemon is some code that will only exist when we're trying to build out our project. But once we sort of like put our entire project together and like push that out to a production environment, let's say, like if we were bundling up our code to provide to like a client or to a user, nodemon would not be a part of those dependencies, basically. So we've got nodemon. So now what we can do is in our scripts here, we can say when we want to start our server, we can say start here. And we're going to do nodemon not index.js, but server.js, meaning that when we run npm run start, or for short npm start, that this is what is going to run. Since we have start in our scripts here, that when we run npm start or npm run start, it's going to run this particular script right here. So we'll save that, go to our terminal, and we'll do npm start. And with that, looks like it was able to run nodemon. but it says we cannot find modules tmp1/app, and that's because in server.js, cannot find module from users 9.0 instructor class tmp1 app. And why is that? Did you mean to import /app.js? So app.js here. Import Express constant Express. I get that. Export default app. Server here. Slash. No, app.js. Wait a second. Oh. So it looks like we do have to specify the file extension here, because if we tried to import just the app, it seemed to have been looking for a folder instead or something. So it looks like with that, we're good. And if we were to try and run a query against our server right now, if we were to try and make GET request to http://localhost:1337, we'll make that GET request. We can see, boom, we have our message hello world set up from this over here to Postman because we'll be using this a little bit more. We can see that this hello world came from in our app.js, this hello world that we res.json. Just as a little bit of review of how Express works or what we can do with Express. Any questions on any of this so far? This should all be review. All right. So far, so good. Okay. So then next up, we may not necessarily want to put everything inside the app.js. We might want to use some routers, or we might want to basically be able to break up our code into different files so that like not everything's all chunked up into like our one big app.js. So one common strategy for that is the use of routers to be able to say like, all right, we're going to create this separate sort of like sub application that if we receive a request to these routes, then we're going to respond in these ways. Similar to how we're specifying that if we make a request to just slash an app.get here, that we're going to respond with hello world. If we said we wanted something to respond to like the products path, then like we can, like if, for example, we said app.get, like let's say slash books, request, response. Then up top here, I'll do just something like const books is equal to an array of like, let's just say the Great Gatsby, The Catcher in the Rye, Yellow Mockingbird. I mean, let's also make it a little bit more international. Let's say Three Kingdoms, Rashomon, and we'll also say those are the only international books I know. So we'll go with those for our books. So if we did app.get books, we could do res.json books. So now we have two different behaviors coming from our application. We've got app.get slash, which gives us back some JSON that has message hello world. And we've got app.get books, which we should expect to give us an array of book titles. So let's have a look here. If we run app.get here at the home path, we get message hello world. And if we did the same for slash books here, we should expect to see a list of books exactly in the same way that we had right here. But then if we also wanted to do something that let us like add some books in, remove some books, update a book, we would have to add some paths on. Like we would have to add different actions for that particular URL. Sure, we could also do something like app.post like slash create books. We could do something like app.put slash update book. And like, sure, that's something that you could do. And like, you could like finish this up with like the callbacks and everything. But that doesn't quite get into like the RESTful pattern that that's generally used across like different like backend systems. Generally speaking, when we have a resource, like let's say, for example, a book, we'll have a couple of different actions that you can perform on that resource. So for a book, so for any given resource, really, we can perform what we've already gone over with CRUD actions: creating, reading, updating, and deleting items from that particular resource. In this particular case, the resource that we're dealing with are books. So we should be able to create, read, update, and delete books. And we generally want to structure our backend API to follow the RESTful format. And what that basically means is that we're going to have two specific routes that deal with our resource. And we're going to follow this pattern because that makes it so that whenever we work with any API, that we can expect the behavior of that API to be predictable. That we can expect that if we were to use any other API and that API followed a RESTful pattern, that if that API offered a resource called like users, you should expect that making a GET request to /users would get you all the users. Making a GET request to /user/user ID would get you that particular user with that user ID. That if you make a request to /users, that's a post request, that's going to create a user. Because by convention, that's what the RESTful pattern like does. And so generally speaking, like we want to build our backend APIs to follow that pattern. So anyone else who might be using our API can expect the same behavior. Does anyone have any questions on that? Going once, going twice. Okay, so let's rebuild this in a more RESTful way. Right now, we've got one route for app.getBooks, but what we want to do is we want to be able to, so we can read all books. We want to be able to read an individual book. We want to be able to create a book. We want to be able to update a book, and we want to be able to delete a book. So what that's going to look like is doing app.get books with ID like that. And we can do const ID is equal to rec.params. Const book is equal to books at ID. And we'll be using ID as a index for now. And then we can do res.json book. And I don't think we can just send a string over. So we're going to have to do something like title book. And then, so that's getting all books, getting a single book. So for creating a book, we can do app.post to /books. And then we can do const title is equal to rec.body, books.push title, res.json, title is going to be our title. And in order to use rec.body, what we've got to do before this is we've got to include a little bit of middleware. That we've got to be able to say app.use express.json. And what this will do is it'll give us access to rec.body in the request body. Without express.json, without that middleware, it would be undefined for us. By using express.json, that's going to set it up so that we can actually use it. And let me show an example of that. If we were to save this now, go to Postman, we get all our books. We have all of these books. We make a post request to books, go to our body, and in our JSON, rather than posting some carbonara, we're going to post, what did I call it? The key is going to be title. And the value we'll say is going to be crime and punishment. So if we send that, we can see we got an object back, title, crime and punishment, which is as we expect from what we're res.jsoning back here to say, give us back the exact same title that we sent to you. And if we were to make a GET request to get all books, we can see that crime and punishment is in fact now in our list. However, if we got rid of this middleware here, comment that out, save it, make a GET request for our data again, we've got our default data. If we were to try and make a post request again with the same book, send it, it'll say error cannot destructure property, rec.body as it is undefined. And if we were to go down here, we can see type error cannot destructure property title of rec.body as it is undefined. That express.json here was the thing that was making it so that we're able to access rec.body and therefore able to access the data that's coming back from the user. But without it, then rec.body is just going to be completely blank, undefined. So we'll uncomment that, save it, go back here, create crime and punishment, and get all our books again, and there it is. Same logic applies for being able to update a book. That if we were to do app.put books at book ID, finish that off, const ID is rec.params, where ID here, rec.params here, that is coming from up in our URL. That we are, in the same way that we were using colon, whatever like name that came after colon as the value from for use params in using React Router DOM, that we can follow that exact same pattern for Express, that we can get the ID from rec.params just like this. And then we can get the title from rec.body, and then we can say books at this given ID is equal to our title. And then finally, we send back an object where the title is whatever title that we gave it. Sarah, question?
Yeah, so did you say that rec.params is the same way that use params from React Router DOM works, where we're just pulling the parameter from the books / colon ID?
Yeah, exactly. That you'd be able to see, if you see that value in the URL, then it's going to pull that value from the URL.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And let's see that in action. That now that we've got that changed, now if we go here, we'll make the post request to create crime and punishment. We'll send it. We get the object back. Let's get our details. We can see crime and punishment is here twice. So going from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we'll change number 6 up. So we'll make a put request to http://localhost:1337/books. And let's try this first. If we just make a put request, but we don't give it an ID, what do you think is going to happen?
It won't work.
Correct. That it will not work, and instead it'll give us a error saying like, hey, you cannot put books. And it gives us a status of 404, not found, because it couldn't find that, like, it couldn't find this path. But if we were to put that 6 here, to say put at http://localhost:1337/books/ the ID or index where it's supposed to be at, we send it. Oh, yeah, I forgot. Like, whenever we, wait, actually, no, put books 6. Oops. I save? No, I didn't save. Okay, now it's saved, and now we should be able to put. But let's go back to doing the post. Go ahead and create that. Yep, crime and punishment. Do the get request. We can see crime and punishment right there. If we make the put request, we can see, okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we make the put request to just books, we can see that, hey, we cannot put to just books. But if you make a put request to book/5, and instead of crime and punishment, we said War and Peace. Make that request. We can see we got the updated object back titled War and Peace. And if we were to get all of our books again, we can see that that actually did change the value of a crime and punishment to War and Peace. All right, Karen?
Yeah, what you call it? It's two questions. Like one, put request, doing a put request, that's changing the like the volume or whatever item you have.
Yeah,
Am I
exactly. Exactly. Generally speaking, when we make a put or a patch request, we're changing up data that we are already tracking on.
Oh, okay, okay. And then the other thing is, all what you're doing, is it only through like what is this damn thing called?
Postman?
Postman. Is it only through Postman we're gonna be able to view it or see the changes, or you are you gonna continue to work for us to see it like through the browser itself?
We can see it through the browser. It's just that by doing it through Postman, it's the easiest way. Because otherwise I would have to like create a web page and like create a form for us to be able to type in like a title and then click on that and then like see the value that comes back. Like basically I'd have to write a lot more front end code to see like the impact of like what's going on the back end. And with
Oh,
Postman, at least we can see like what's going on just like immediately, just like that.
okay, got it.
Yep. All right. Awesome. So that's been the put request. So we are able to get all books. We're able to get an individual book, which let's test that out real quick. If we were to just get book/1, send it, we can see title, Catcher in the Rye, so we can do that. We can post to books to create a book. We can put to update an existing book. And finally, we should be able to app.delete given a book ID. We should be able to do const ID is equal to rec.params, get the ID from our URL. Const deleted is equal to books.splice at the given ID, which technically is our index right now, comma 1 to say we want to remove one item starting at that index. And then we can res.json deleted, and then whatever book that we just deleted. So if we're to save this, go back here, make a get request to all of our books. You can see The Great Gatsby, Catcher in the Rye, all of these. If we were to make a delete request to book 0, we should expect to see The Great Gatsby get deleted. So if we send that, we can see deleted The Great Gatsby. And technically speaking, we don't really need this to be in an array. Save that. Make the request again, deleted The Great Gatsby. And if we make a get request to get our books again, send it, we can see The Great Gatsby is gone. So those are our standard CRUD actions for Express, or our standard CRUD actions that we would generally be seeing in any sort of like API setup. Any questions? So far, this should still be a little bit of review. All right, going once. Will.
Can I see your code for the get real quick?
Sure. So for get, we have two different like paths here. We've got get for just /books, which should get us all of the books. And then we have a get for /books/ID, which should get us the details for just one of the books.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool, awesome, no problem. All right, then moving on. If we had to deal with like multiple resources, like this could get like pretty complex pretty quickly. So what we generally do is we break up our different routes into what we call routers. So that way we can create like a separation of concerns and say like, hey, for the code that has to deal with like dealing with the books, they're going to be in /routers/books. For the code that's dealing with like the library patrons or like library card holders, that's going to be in like /router/ like patrons or something like that. So let's go ahead and move some of this code over to a separate area. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call this routers. Or really, if we were following more of like the model view controller like sort of deal, it would maybe go more towards like controller. We'll leave it for now. We'll leave this for now. So in our routers, we'll go ahead and create a new file, and we'll call this the books.js. And now that we've got books.js here, if we go to app.js, we'll grab everything inside of books here, or everything that has to do with books, up to here, paste it in here. So at the very top, we'll do something along the lines of import Express from Express, and then const router is equal to express.router. And now instead of using app, we can use router here. Like so. And then once we've got all of that, let me add semicolons after each of these just to keep things clean and consistent. After that, we can export our default router. And in app.js, we can do import books router from /router/books.js. And then here we can do app.use for say /books, and we'll tie that to our books router. So what that'll do is it'll say, hey, when we reach any path that deals with books, we're gonna pass that request down to the books router. And then in the books router, we're gonna have to change this up a little bit as well. That we're gonna have to get rid of books here for each entry because we already defined the books part of the URL inside of app.js when we did app.use/books. Any request that goes to books, we're going to pass along to the books router. And then once we're in the books router, we already know that the URL starts with books, so we don't need to include books as like any part of this URL here, or as part of this path here. Because if we left books here, it would try and do /books/books/id or /books/books, which is not what we want. So we'll go ahead and get rid of the additional books that we have here. Give that a save. We'll go back and let's try and verify that things are still working. That if we make a get request to books, that we have all the books. If we make a post request to books, give the title War and Peace, we can see the object come back with War and Peace. Get all this again, we can see War and Peace is still here. If we get a single book, let's say book 1, we should expect to see Catcher in the Rye. We can see it. If we make a put request here and we say we want to change Catcher in the Rye to Cat's Cradle. Send that. We'll do a get request. Well, yeah, we can see when we make a get request to book/1, it did update that particular book. But if we get all books again, we can see that instead of Catcher in the Rye, it's now Cat's Cradle. So after moving all of our code over to a separate router, we can still see that like things worked out just fine. And traditionally speaking, you can also move some of these functions over to a separate area as well. Generally, that follows a convention that's known as the model view controller pattern. So what that generally looks like is if we have like a different folder here, not in routers, but outside of it, like here, controllers. And before I continue, Kyron, what's up?
Yeah, now the change to the code you did from what you originally had, can you just go over that slightly? I'm not sure what was the main difference. I know you did instead of just have an app, you created a router.
Mhm.
What was the difference in just using a router? Because
Gotcha.
yeah.
So the thing here is, number one, we used a router, and then 2, we replaced app.get with router.get, so that instead of like defining it on the app, we're defining it on the router. So what that does is that it lets us take this router that we defined up here,
Yeah.
and then use that inside an app as like a separate sort of like middleware, if you want to call it that. That when we have any path that starts with /books, that we're going to pass those requests off to the books router. And that lets us like save from having to like put all of our code into a single file here. And it also lets us like separate things out so that we know, all right, like when we want to make a request to any resource that deals with books, where are we supposed to look? Oh, hey, like anything that deals with books goes into books router. So all I need to do is look inside the routers for books. So that's one of the key reasons why we would do something like that. It's like, yes, we could have like app.get for all of these, but it simplifies things a lot more if you break things down so that like each resource like has its own like separate router. And that's going to be especially like helpful when you start dealing with like a bunch of different resources. If you have like 10 or 15 or 20 different resources that you want to provide access for.
Okay, that makes sense. And if you're going by ID, it would still go through the books router, right?
Exactly. Because anything that starts with books like this gets passed to the books router. And then the books router is just putting on whatever comes after books. So it would be books and then /. So anything that's just books would, if we make a request to anything that's just books, we would end up here. If we made a request to /books/ID, then like we would end up here.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. I don't know how I missed that point, but yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome, no problem. Sarah?
The value of doing it this way is so that like if there's a mistake on app, like it doesn't mess everything up, like separating concerns.
It would still mess things up because like your app might crash if you've got an error, but like the separation of concerns is really there so that like number one, it's easier for things to be organized for you as a developer and for other people who have to work on like the same code base as you. And two, so that like I mean that is really like the key reason. Just like being able to separate those concerns out so that you don't have like one big like blob of like code that like is really hard to like look for anything inside of.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay. So that's the deal with separating things out into a router. Traditionally speaking, for certain frameworks, for example, with like Ruby on Rails, you'll see a convention called like model view controller, in which like they'll break things out into models, which represent the data, views, which represent like the layout or like the web page that you're supposed to see based on like the data that you've got, and the controller, which represents like the logic that happens whenever you have to like mess with like a particular resource. And so each of these callbacks for like, let's say when we do a get for all of the books, or a get for a single book, or a post to create a book, all of these are considered controller actions. To create an item, to update an item, to delete an item, all those count as controller actions. So what we can do is we can move these actions into our controllers. Create a new file, call this books.js. And we'll do say export. We'll say get a single book. And this is going to take a request response. I don't think we can do it like this. So what we're going to do is const get single. Const get single book. It's equal to that. And we'll go to routers here. Get single book. Details here. Paste it here. This, move it over here. Get all books equal to request response. Well, found request response part because we already have that copied. You can call this const create book C2 like that. We can do update book is gonna be this. Oh, again, I don't need that. I already have the clipboard. And then finally, delete book is gonna be this. Const delete book. Don't need that. Paste it in there, and there we have it. So now we can export all these functions here. And then in our routers, we'll go ahead and import. And then from here, it's gonna be get single book, get all books, create book, update book, delete book, delete book. Add some new lines here, just to clean it up a little bit. There we go. Get rid of this extra curly brace there. All right. So then when we get our main path, what we're going to do is we're going to get all the books. And when we get a single book, we're going to get a single book. When we're making a post request, we're going to create a book. When we make a put request, we're going to update that book. And when we delete a book, we are going to delete a book. And so doing it this way cleans up the code relatively significantly, in that it gives us the ability to move our logic over to a separate area called our controllers, and that when we see how that looks in the routers, we can see specifically, all right, like what is the action that's being performed when we make a get request for like just the standard books path, or when we make a get request for the books given like an ID in the URL as well. And that also means I'm gonna have to move the books here over to our controllers here. Save that, go back here. There are some of these new lines, save that here. In fact, we could probably condense all of these down now. Save that. And there we go. And things are looking a little bit cleaner again. Yeah. Karen?
Yeah. What was the reasoning for you to move the books over to the controllers?
Great question. That's because right now we're only working with data that's in memory. So if we didn't move books over to this file, then whenever we run any of these actions aren't going to know like what books are, because we only have it defined in like the routers file. So we have to move the books array over to the controllers file. Otherwise, these actions aren't going to know like what the array of books is.
Let me see. And which like books yeah, I see that's where the books are, but I'm just trying to see what is the path that it's following along that you're saying it's not gonna know that.
Because at this point it's not talking so much about the path so much as like when we call the function, does the function know what books is? It's like in routers here, what we're saying is like when you get to this path, go call this function. But because the function exists in a different file, that different file doesn't have access to our list of books. So that's why it's going to say like, hey, like we don't know what books is if we try to call this function, if we had books defined in this file over here.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. All right.
Right. Awesome. Cool. Angel?
Yeah, could I see the controllers file?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay. So we've been able to go over routers, we were able to go over the idea of controllers, and we're able to go through and do full CRUD actions across like our resources here. But this is the point where we can actually start working with actual data. Now that, or also Angel, is it another question or like old hand?
Old
Okay.
answer.
All right, no problem, no problem. Okay, so at this point, like now that we've gone through SQL, and now that we've gone through like the basic structure of like how we can organize Express apps, we can now start talking about how we can bring SQL into our Express apps. No more of this putting stuff into like weird memory so that like we can access it based on like whatever files it's in. No more of that. We are free from that now. So in order to become totally free from that, what we're going to do is we're going to install a package that helps our Express app communicate with our Postgres backend. Oh yeah, power to the people. So we'll create a new terminal here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to npm install PGPromise. And PGPromise is a library that gives us access to basically set up like a connection to our Postgres database. And the promise part of this is that it's providing all of these different functions to access the database using the promise architecture. Basically meaning that like every single like SQL request that you make through the JavaScript here is basically wrapped up in a promise. And once it's wrapped up in a promise, you wait for the promise to finish. And once that promise is finished, you get your data back from the database. Sounds relatively simple, right? And let's see how that looks in action. Before we can start using PGPromise, we have to tell PGPromise how to connect to our database. It's not as simple as just like saying, okay, like we plugged in like the package, now we're good to go. At this point, we still need to be able to tell our PGPromise package, all right, like how do you access the database? Like how are you supposed to connect? And to do so, like we have to use a configuration file that is relatively documented in like PGPromise library. So let's go ahead and have a look at that. We'll move this over here. We'll go here, PGPromise. check the GitHub page here. So here is the config. In the get started. According to steps in the official documentation. All right, there we go. So to install, like we've already done, we do npm install PGPromise. And once we, next step after installing the package is going to be initialization to be able to load it up and get PGPromise connected to our database. So we would have to start with a set of initialization options, and then we import PGPromise and we give that imported value our initial options. So to see what this looks like without using like the old syntax here, what that's going to look like is something along the lines of this. If we were to create a new folder, we'll call this db, and we'll create a new file, call this config.js. Inside of our db, we'll import PGP from PGPromise. That's step number one. Const init options is going to be, for now, just an empty object. And then we can do const db is equal to PGP with our initial options. And finally, we can export default db. So let me go through this line by line because this is all relatively new stuff. Number one, we're importing the PGPromise package and we're importing the default export from PGPromise and we're putting that into a variable called PGP. The default export for PGPromise seems to be a constructor that helps us create a connection to the database. And what I mean by constructor, I mean like a function that helps set up like an object that gives us like a bunch of methods to be able to access the database, whether that's like making select requests or like inserts or like updates or what have you. Our initial options right now is just an empty object. That these are the options that we're supposed to provide to PGP so that we tell it, here's how you connect to the database. And then finally, we do export default DB because DB here is now going to be our means of talking to our SQL server. So just this on its own isn't going to be enough. We do need to set our initial options here. So, oh, I see. I missed a step here. PGP constructor here. Okay, require PGPromise with init options. Then the connection is going to be a configuration object. Okay, so this is where the configuration comes in, I believe. Yes. All right, so then this becomes PGP, and then after that, const db is equal to PGP. And then from here, we can define how we're connecting to the database. So host, generally localhost, port, generally 5432, because that's the default for Postgres. The database we're going to be using, in this case, we'll say our database is going to be library. User is going to be, and for your user, you're going to want to use whatever user that you have in Postgres. But if you don't particularly have a user in Postgres right now, oh yeah, Daniel, use MySQL. But yeah, Daniel, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. You're importing PGP constructor. Are you doing that because you're not using required?
If we were to use require, what the syntax for that would look like would be
for the practice that you gave us, we have required there. We don't have type module.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is just another way of doing the same thing. That like what
would we have to do? So we would have to put required and then in the parentheses PG dash promise and then options. So we can just follow this is what I'm asking.
Yeah, you could follow this exactly.
And not use PGP constructor.
Yeah, exactly. Like PGP constructor here is just because the thing that we're getting back from require here is the constructor to generate PGP here.
Right. I just didn't want to get because we're not going to use the constructor if we have to use required.
Well, this is basically the constructor. It's like you can do it all in one line because this like what we get back from the require is the constructor. And
No,
then
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying like we're not going to do it like you're doing it now if we're doing required, period, is what I'm asking.
Yes, exactly. That if you use required, then like you can just stuff that all into one line.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Cool. All right, so we've got that. We've got initial options. Don't really have any initial options, but we are setting up a means of connecting to our database. So what we would have to do here is we'd have to create a user account that's set up to connect to our database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set my user to be test user, and the password for our test user I'm going to set as password. But in order for this to work, because if I were to try and like actually use this, and let me go ahead and use what I have here for now and put that into our controller action here, that if I were to do something along the lines of import db from ../db/config.js, and for get all books, let's start with get all books, that we can do something like const results is equal to await db.query select star from books. And that means that our function here cannot just be a regular function, it's now got to be an async function. Because that's how PGPromise works, that it's giving us a promise back, so we've got to wait for that promise to finish up before we can grab those details. And since it's giving us a promise back, we can use the async await methodology to wait for that promise to finish up before we do anything. Sarah?
Could you go back to the DB config? Yeah. So the constructor is that creating an object of methods that we can use to get the data from the backend. And the object of method is which one again?
Oh, sorry about that. I misspoke a little bit earlier in that what we're getting back from the package isn't the constructor to create like the database connection. It's a constructor to create a constructor to create the database connection, which is why I was thrown off a little bit earlier. It's like, think of it as like a Matryoshka doll, right? It's like there's one layer that you need to like set. It's like
a constructor inside a constructor.
Pretty much. It's like you use the constructor to create a constructor, which you use to create the connection. It's like I don't have the full context into like why that is, because like I haven't worked on PGPromise, but that seems to be like what they're mentioning in the documentation, that this is how it works.
Gotcha. And the object in lines 6 to 11 is what again?
The object from 6 to 11 here is our means of connecting to the database. So for any connection that we're trying to make to the database, we have to tell it like, all right, like where is this database server that you're running this on? What port is it running on? What database are you trying to use? What's the login information to access this database? If you've got all those details, then PGP should be able to make that connection to your database for you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Daniel?
Yeah, where are you getting your port number from?
Oh, because by default, Postgres starts its services on port 5432.
Oh,
so
okay.
that's generally by convention across like all like Postgres installations, unless you have it running on a separate port. But that's not something you need to worry about unless like you are like specifically like running your Postgres server on like a port that's not like the standard.
So our port is always going to be 5432.
Unless you have it configured differently.
Okay, I got you.
Awesome. And like generally speaking, like unless you manually have configured it to be something different, it's going to be 5432.
Yeah, okay. I get it. It's just like 'cause I was just confused because like MySQL was I guess that it was 3306 and this is 5432. So
Exactly.
and
Like
it's
most
just
different like applications have like default port numbers that
and
they
yeah,
like they
and,
start their service on.
and this is the default one. Okay, I got you.
Exactly. Awesome. Okay, so we've got that. So in our books.js, we can do const get all books. Const results is equal to await db.query, select star from books. And then we can do res.json results instead. So let's try that out. Let's give that a save. And if we were to go over here, nothing's crashing. All right, so let's see what happens if we were to try and get all books. Make the get request. Oh. We save. What's going on? Get all books here. Results is able to wait that. Wait, results. Get on the server first, start it up again. Make the request. That's weird. Get slash does get all books. Controllers. Get all books. Async request response. Const results is equal to. Save here. Okay, now something's happening. That up here, cannot find modules, controllers, books in routers, books.js. Why is it giving me issues now? / controllers / books.js. There we go. All right. So if we make the request again, says could not get a response, socket hang up, because it seems like we got a crash here. Because it's telling us that role test user does not exist, which is expected because right now we do not have a test user account for Postgres. So the way that Postgres works is that generally every database has like a set of users that are allowed to access different databases. In the same way that like when you log into your Mac, you have to log into like your user account to be able to like access your details. And you can have like multiple users per like computer, right? Like if you've used like a Windows computer or like if you've got like multiple different user accounts on like on your MacBook, that like each individual user account is able to access like their specific details. And that's basically the same idea for databases. That for a database, each different user has access to their own different like set of details, so that one user, unless they're like an admin or a super user, won't have access to like another person's like details. Right now, what we said was we're expecting a test user account in our config.js that we're saying like, hey, we were trying to log into our database at localhost at port 5432. We're trying to access the library database with this test user. But the problem is test user doesn't exist. And if test user doesn't exist, what we can do is we can go ahead and create that user in Postgres. So if we go back to our terminal and we run psql, what we can do is we can do create user test user. And what that'll do is it'll create that user account for us. And if we see create role here, that means it succeeded. That was able to create role test user, and we're now able to like log in with test user. But there is a second step to this, which is the password. I believe by convention that PGP requires like the user accounts that are going through it to have a password, and just having an empty password isn't going to work. So we do have to set a password on this user account. And I always forget how to do that for SQL. So let me go ahead and look that up again. So Postgres change user password. There we go. We would have to do alter user, whatever user that we're altering, with password, and then the password. So then we can do alter user, test user. If it's with password, with password. With password, and then the password that we want to give to our test user. And in this case, we're going to say password because that's the password that we're providing up here. Really, it should come from like whatever password that you're giving the user like on this end, you should be putting up here, but it's a chicken before the egg problem here. So we're gonna alter user test user and give it the password to say like this test user can now log in with the password. We do that, we see alter role come up, we're all good here. Now that we've got that down, if we go back to node here, let's go ahead and kill this, start it back up again. Go back to Postman, we'll send the GET request. Could not get response because up here, database library does not exist. Now, if we go back to pSQL and we do \DT or \L, excuse me, this shows us a list of all the databases that we have. But however, we do not currently have a database called library. So that's what that error means. That when it says error, database library does not exist, that means that we just don't have that database like on our SQL server yet. So in order to do that, we can go to pSQL. We can do, or here's a general convention that that you'll see for some of these like exercises. That some of these exercises will include a seed file. Where is it? Here. Seed.sql. And what this will look like is probably something along the lines of this. That it'll help you create the database or library. And then we'll connect to the library. And then we'll create a table books. And for now, let's just go ahead and give it just one column, title. And we'll say it's not null. And then now that we've got that, save it. So what we can do now, exit out of this, ls. And we now have the ability to do pSQL-f seed.sql. And what this command is going to do is it's going, by doing pSQL-f seed.sql, the -f means file. So whatever comes after the -f is going to be the file that we're going to run through pSQL. And since we're passing seed.sql here, it's going to run through every command in seed.sql and run it through pSQL to run each of these commands. So what we're going to do here is by running pSQL-f seed.sql, we'll run all of the commands in seed.sql without having to type them out manually inside of the interactive pSQL terminal. Daniel, question?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so you're saying instead of the terminal, when we do, or at any point, like if we have seed.sql, we can do that right in our VS Code. Like creating a database and creating a table.
Still technically through the terminal. It's just that you don't have to type it all out like yourself. You can just basically execute the file.
Okay, well, what I'm saying is like, we can just use our seed.sql period. We can skip the terminal part of it, or we have to put it in our terminal as well.
Exactly. You can skip the, or you still have to run this command to run the file, but you don't have to type all this out inside of like the interactive Postgres terminal.
So in our terminal, we're still gonna have to sign on to Postgres. We're still gonna have to create a user in our terminals. We're still gonna have to create a user in our terminals. We're still gonna have to create a password in our terminals and give it the username or role in our terminals. After that, we can create a database and everything else and create a table from the seed.sql.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, awesome. And then, yeah, if we were to run this command, I'll run it. It creates a database, connects to the library, creates a table for books, and that sets it up. So the key reason why we would want our data or our details in seed.sql like this is if, for example, like we were working on this with multiple different people, right? Everybody has to be on the same page for like what their database looks like. And that means that we can't just have everyone like type in the commands exactly right? Because like if somebody makes like a slight like typo or something and like doesn't add a column into like their database while everyone else has that column, then it's gonna be really hard for that one person to like be able to like continue to work on the project. Or if one person doesn't have a table that like everyone else has, then it's gonna be really hard for that person to like be able to like do the work that they need to do. So that's why, like generally speaking, when dealing with databases, there's generally going to be a set of commands that help you get up to speed with wherever the database is supposed to be at in terms of like development. Because like a database can be constantly changing. Like if you're working on a production database and you're just like coming onto a project, it could be that like 2 weeks ago, like they added a column. So like if you had like a database from like 4 weeks ago, it's going to be slightly different from like the database from 2 weeks ago. So providing these SQL files is a means of basically creating checkpoints of like, here's what the database looked like before, here's what the database is supposed to look like now. And we'll get more into this when we talk about like migrations, and we'll talk about migrations when we talk about ORMs. But for now, just note that it's a common pattern to provide like SQL files like this, so that you can just run the SQL files and get your database like up to speed with where everyone else is at. Karen?
I think you're gonna get to it later on, like you said, when we talk about them other stuff. But now that we have like our SQL tied in with our Postgres, we will be able to like I don't want to call it a pull request, but like you're gonna be able to pull in the new data once it's updated, like you said, weeks down the line, and then you will be able to continue with whatever project you're working on, correct?
But there's the thing. It's like we can set up the structure, but the data itself is going to be a little bit different unless you're providing like a separate seed file. And I actually misnamed this file. That this file should generally be called schema. And
Yeah.
generally the data that you want is going to be in a file called seed.sql. And seed.sql is generally to be able to add some default data into your table so that you have something to work with when you're like doing some testing out, especially if you're in like sort of like in a development environment. So what this file might look like would be something like insert into like books, say title, values, catcher in the rye. Come on. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a couple of books all at once here. There we go. Thank you, autocomplete. Values, all these, and let's go with that. Okay. So it's like, yeah, generally it'll be broken up into a schema.sql, which helps you set up the initial structure of your database. And then if you want data to be able to work with, that's generally going to be in seed.sql. If we're talking about like data that's like stuff that's coming from you testing with stuff and like putting your own stuff in, like that's generally not going to be part of the seed unless you like specifically write it into the seed.sql file. Otherwise, like all that data that you're working with like individually is just going to be on your own system.
Okay, so you're not pulling it from like a master file that's being updated at a higher level, right?
Exactly. The only thing that's like common across like all the copies of the database is going to be the structure based on the schema.sql here. But
Oh.
but generally speaking, like most organizations also have seed data, which is basically just like some test data or like dummy data that you can like load into your database once you got the structure set up. And this would be common across like, if you do like run the seed, then this would be common across like all your different systems. But anything that you're manually plugging in would only be on your system.
Okay, I don't know why I just had the idea like there was like a large file that everybody would be working on. So like you said, if it's updated down the line, once say you take a 2-week vacation, you're back, you want to work on what the rest of your team is working on, you will be able to pull in that updated file and then continue. But no.
Exactly. And that gets into like the idea of migrations, which like very basically speaking right now would just be like a set of like different schema.sqls that make changes to the structure of your database based on like when those changes were made. And once you apply all those different like changes to the structure, then you should be up to date. But we'll get much more into that like once we start talking about ORMs.
All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, awesome. So we ran psql-fc.sql, which is now schema.sql. But let's go ahead and run psql-fc.sql again to be able to load our details into our books table. So if we run this, I think we need commas after this, no? Yeah, we need commas after these. Comma, comma, no, comma, 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 save. Insert into, oh. And for our, we gotta connect to library. Right table books. Books does not exist. Oh. Is it? Yeah. Or yeah. There we go. Yeah, for some reason it does require like the double quotes around the name of the table, so just look out for that. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've inserted 9 rows into our database. If we were to run psql and connect to our library and select star from books, we should see, all right, here are the IDs, here are the titles. We got that from a completely fresh install or a completely fresh setup of our database. So we'll exit out of this. And now that we've got data in our database, let's go ahead and see what happens if we try and make a GET request to all of our books now. Now that we've got a user account that works, now that we've got a database that lines up with what we specified in the config, because remember, in the config, we said we wanted to connect to a database called library. We didn't have that before, but we have it now. We didn't have a user called test user before, but we have it now. They didn't have a password of password before, but they have it now. So let's see what happens if we run this. Oh, looks like we're still not quite there. Go back to node here, scroll all the way down, scroll up a little bit. Database, let's start up again. Send it. Permission denied for table A. Sometimes there are permission issues that exist for Postgres users. Like I was saying, like every computer has like different user permissions, right? That like you're able to access your own data, and like any other user that's maybe using the same computer only has access to their own data. Test user, when we created it, does not seem to have the permissions for the books table. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to give it permission to go look at the books. And in order to do that, we're going to go to psql, and we're going to equal and database user. Access. Redefine non-login roles for PG read all, PG write all. So what that's going to look like is grant PG read all data to test user. But before that, based on what it's saying, we have to be connected to the right database cluster. So we got to connect to the database first and then grant those permissions to our test user. So we'll connect to our library database. Number 1, we will grant PG write all data based on what it's telling us right here. PG write all data to my user. And my user in this case would be test user. You can see grant role worked fine. We also want to grant PG read all data to test user. Grant role looks fine. So let's go ahead, after running that, let's go back to node, kill this, start the server back up again, go to Postman, make the request, and boom. We can see that we now have the data. After we got permission from the database to say like, all right, this user now has permission to be able to access this database. All right, Angel.
Yeah, can you go back to those commands? I was having the same issue.
Right here. That you're going to want to connect to the database you're working with first, and then once you're connected to the database, you can run these grant permissions.
All right, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions before I continue? Next up, we're going to be doing the rest of the CRUD actions using the PGPromise library. Although I now realize we've been going at this for about an hour and 15 minutes. How are you guys feeling on the break?
Yeah, that would be nice.
All right, cool. Then we'll take a break until we'll say 9:15. We'll come back at 9:15. All right, it's 9:15, so we ought to be back. Does anyone have any questions on what we just went through before I finish up with building out the rest of the CRUD actions using our database connection? Going once. Going twice. Okay, then we'll be moving on. All right. So just to briefly go over where we left off, we were able to get our database connection working. So we were able to import our database from dbconfig.js, and we were able to get that working when we get all of our books. That inside get all books, we're able to we converted this over into an async function, and now we're awaiting the results of our SQL query, loading that up into a variable called results, and then we're sending those results over back to the client side. So that's what it looks like for selecting all columns from all columns and all rows from our books table. But now if we wanted to get a single book, let's go ahead and get rid of this. We can do const results is equal to await db dot, I think we can do 1. Yep. And it fills it in automatically for us here. But this is what that query would look like to get a single book. We'll make this an async function as well. That it still follows the same pattern, that like we're still getting the ID from rec.params, but rather than using the ID as an index in an array, we're taking this ID and we're providing it to our query. But we're saying select star from books where ID is equal to $1. And this is what they call, I believe, parameterized variables, meaning that as you stick additional values onto the end here, these values will take the place of the $ values inside of the query here. Similar to how if we did like my name is like name, or like let name is equal to, like, let's say Joe. Like if you did like my name is Joe and then you had a string that says like my name is name, it's basically the same idea as like string interpolation, except it will replace the values that you've got over here into like the query with each $1 representing the position of the argument that you're providing. And we'll dive into a stronger example of that once we talk about updating and creating. But Sarah, question?
Just to get that clearly, the ID on line 15 is going to replace what's after the $sign. So like
the $sign and the 1. So like it'll get rid of the $sign as well.
Gotcha. And the 1.
Yep.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right. So we did const results is equal to await Karen?
Sorry, that same $ and 1. Do we need the double quote after that? Like how that came? Oh, I see. Select and okay.
Yeah, because
Sorry.
all this is in like one string.
Okay, makes sense.
Awesome. Cool. So we got const ID is equal to rec.params, const results is equal to await db.1, and db.1 should get us only one row from our results here. And then we do select star from books where ID is equal to $1, and we're going to be replacing this $1 with whatever value that we're providing as the second argument to db.1. So if we follow along with that and we do res.json results here, give that a save, and we'll go back to Postman, and we'll go ahead and get localhost 1337/book/1, send it, and boom, there's our 1 value for the catcher in the rye. If we did like 5, send it, get the Great Gatsby. If we did 10, we could not get a response, because if we try doing that with the ID of 10, it gives us an error here that says no data returned from the query. And what we could do is we could make this a little bit more resilient, and we could do something along the lines of let's say let do or try move this up here and catch Then error. Then we can res.status 404.json error, the book could not be found. So now what we can say is if you give us a valid ID, or we're going to try and look for a book given the ID that you gave us in the params. If we find it, then we're going to res.json the results. Otherwise, if we don't find it, we're going to catch that error and we're going to res.status with the 404, with the 404 being the status code for we couldn't find the thing that you were looking for. And we're going to send back some JSON data that says error, we couldn't find this book. So now if we save that, scroll back down, we'll try making a request for book/10 again. We'll see error, the book cannot be found. We get a status of 404. If we tried looking for books at 9, we do in fact get that book back. Any questions on any of this part here for getting a single book? Good once. Good twice. Oh, Karen.
Yeah, so you have in that code to say any book that go by ID that comes after the last one that you have listed in, the list of books, then it should show the error talking about the book could not be found, right?
Can you say that one more time?
You call it I'm trying to understand the code. The code is saying it's not only for that particular book item 10, it's for any book that any book ID that is not listed, right?
Exactly. That like if we do find the book, then like we should be able to res.json with results with no problem. But for any ID that doesn't exist, meaning that we couldn't find that ID in our books table, then this catch should apply for all of those.
Okay. All right. Okay, got it.
Awesome. Cool. So that is for getting a single book. Next up, we'll be moving on to creating a book, and let's see what that looks like. So here we've got const title is equal to rec.body. And rather than pushing into our array of books, what we're going to do is we're going to do const result is equal to await db.1. And we're going to go ahead and do that. And we're going to make this an async function. And our result is going to be await db.1. And then the query that we're running is insert into books. And then the column that we're providing is going to be title and values $1 returning ID. Well, in this case, we don't want to just return the ID. Let's go ahead and return the entire thing. Note that this returning star here or returning ID is a way to be able to get a value back after we've done an insert or update statement. Because unless, like, the only times you generally get data back when you're querying SQL is when you do a select statement. Using returning is a way to be able to get a value back from the SQL when you're doing something like an insert statement or delete statement or an update statement. Otherwise, like the only way to get data is going to be through a SQL query or through a select query. Okay, but we're going to change this ID to star because we want to grab the whole thing. And we're going to be providing the title here so that way we can do res.json with the result. Sarah, question?
Sorry, could you repeat what you just said one more time about the select query, and that's the only way we could get the data back, unless it's, did you say like, and how that relates to the CRUD actions?
For sure. So it's like generally speaking on the SQL side of things, right? Select has generally been the only way that you can like get data back, like results back. But by using the returning clause, we're able to say like whenever we make an update or create a new item or delete something, if we add this returning clause to the end of it, we can say like, all right, for this thing that we just deleted or for this thing that we just created, we wanted to also get back these fields from that thing that we just changed.
Gotcha, understood. But with SQL, we can only do that with select.
Now that we have returning, we can also do it using returning.
Okay, now we can got
It's
it.
like traditionally you could only do it with select, but by using returning with like updating, deleting, or creating, we can get back the values that we just did the action on.
Understood. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so we do const result is equal to db.1, insert into books, all that. And let's go ahead and let's run this for now, see what happens. So if we were to get rid of this ID, make it post request, go to the body here, move this out of the way, title, but Sarah had a book idea here, so we'll use Maj to Catalonia.
Yay.
Excellent. There we go. So we'll make this post request and we can see that we get ID 10 back and see how like this auto incremented. Now that we have SQL dealing with our data for us, we don't have to worry about like providing any IDs. SQL is going to handle the IDs for us based on what we set up in this schema.sql here, where we said ID serial primary key. By providing the serial keyword here, that whenever we add a new value into our table, the serial is going to take care of like incrementing that ID for us. All right, but we got this book in here, managed to make the post. Seems like it's working. What happens if we tried to make a post with no details? Looks like it crashes. And how does it crash? It tells us that error, there is no parameter $1, meaning that if we don't provide an object that has like a title inside of it, that it's just going to crash on us and we're not going to get anything back. So what can we do to fix this? Well, we can just check whether or not title is there first. So what we can do is we can say if title, then we'll const result is equal to that, and we'll do res.json, our result. Else res.status 400.json error, the title is required. To say we'll send back this error code for 400, which more or less means like, hey, user provided details that had an error with it, and we'll send back the error object that says, hey, this is what went wrong with like your request. So that way, if anyone using our API ran into an issue, at least this way they can understand like, all right, like what was wrong with the request I just sent. Cool. So if we save that, scroll down here, make the request again with a completely empty object, you can see, boom, we get an error, the title is required, and we get a 400 bad request. So that takes care of that. Next up would be updating the book, and update should look almost exactly the same as create. That we got the ID here, we got the title here. We're going to do try if not title, then we're not going to throw an error, but we're going to res dot JSON error, the title is required, dot status 400, and we'll return this here because we don't want to go past this point. Else, if we do have a title, then we're going to do const result is equal to db.1, update books, set title is equal to $1, where ID is equal to $2, returning star. And note how this looks a little bit different from what we have up here. That what we've got up here is we've just got the title on its own as the last parameter here. But here, when we've got multiple different like parameters here, we got to put all those into an array so that it's looking through the array and seeing like, hey, position 1 here is going to line up with title, ID at position 2 here is going to line up with ID. So that's just something that you have got to keep a lookout for. If you want to include multiple values in your SQL statement when you're doing these parameterized variables, if you got multiple, then they've got to go into an array. So now that we've got our result, we should be able to res.json our result. But if we run into an error when we try to do our update, we can catch our error. And res.status 404.json, the book could not be found. There could be another error that happens as a result of this, but for now, we're not going to worry too much about it. And we're just going to assume that if we do run into an error with this update statement, it's most likely because we couldn't find the book. Although we could always look at the error and be like, we'll try that. So we'll do that. We'll do a put request to /books/1 with an empty object. Send it. Says error, the title is required. And so this is the error that it ended up catching. We can get the, looks like there's no details. Let's query there. All right. So that'll be fine. Where does this object start? Oh, here it is. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a lot of details in this error. So we're not gonna do some fancier things to try and figure out exactly what the error is. We'll just go with assuming that it's just a book that could be found. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can get rid of this. And that wraps up our update book method. Cool, so that's updating a book. Last step here is deleting a book. So let's go ahead and deal with that. Get rid of this. And we'll do const ID is rec.params. Thank you for the autocomplete. And so let's read through the code here. We can do a try, and we'll do const result is equal to db.1, delete from books where ID is equal to $1, returning star. We're going to delete one value from books where the ID matches the ID that we got from rec.params, and we're going to be returning all of the fields from that entry. And then we're going to res.json the result to send back the item that we just deleted. Otherwise, if we run into an error here, we're going to assume that that just means that we couldn't find a book with this ID, and we're going to catch error, res.status 404.json, error, the book could not be found. To say, hey, we can't delete a book that we don't know about. So if we save that, go back here, well, number one, let's test out the put request to make sure that it's able to update the value first. So we'll make a get request to book/1. We can see it's catcher in the rye. If we make a put request here, catcher in the rye is G's. I don't know any of this other book, like title. Send it. Looks like we get an empty object back, which is not what we expected. So for update book set title is equal to $1, where ID is equal to $2, returning that. Res.json our result. However, if we make a get request, we can see that it does give us back ID and title of the jungle. What if we called it the Martha Stewart book? So let's try sending a put request to book/1 and update the jungle to be the Martha Stewart cookbook. Send it. Still an empty object. Why is it an empty object?
Steven, is it because you didn't define result?
Well, results right here.
Right, okay.
Let's try it in P-SQL to see what result comes up first. So if we were to, let's say, update books at title equal to, and let's say test. Why did it jump all the way over here? What's going on? Update books at title equal to, and we'll say test where ID is equal to 1. Returning star. It should give us those values back, but for some reason it's not. We did db.query. Let's try that out. Here. Put request. Send it. Console.log the result. Get. Oh, I see. It's because we didn't change this to be an async function. That's the deal with like PGPromise. Because we haven't resolved our query yet, that it's just giving us back an empty object because like the query hasn't finished yet, so there's nothing to give back. So in order to fix this, we've got to change this to be an async function. And then this has to be await db dot instead of query. We can just do 1 because we do expect just 1 value back. We can get rid of this console.log, save it, hop back over here, send the put request. We see now we get our value back of ID1, title Martha Stewart cookbook. Okay. So that deals with the update. Karen, question?
Yeah, what do you call it? You always have to use both the weight and then what's the other thing that you the weight and then what's the other thing? Yeah, async. Async and await have to be used with each other, right? You can't have one without the other, correct?
Exactly. That
Oh.
you can only use await inside of functions that have async in front of them. And that generally either looks like a fat arrow function that's got async like fat arrow like this, or async function that looks like that. You can see the same syntax look both ways, but basically this is how it's going to look.
Okay. And await means just to wait for the what is it, the previous function to finish running before
Not the previous function, but the code that comes right after the await. So it's waiting for this database query to finish first, and then it'll put it into results.
Okay. Got it.
All right, awesome. Sarah?
So the reason why we have to use await is because of all PG, I forgot the name of it, works in a way where we have to get the promise.
Exactly. And it's called PGPromise because like it uses promises to connect to like Postgres. So
Gotcha. And the other question is like when you had said if you go up a little bit, where or maybe down, you said that like when we're yes, line 31, when we're returning all the fields. What are the fields for the rect up that is associated with the title?
returning star just means like all of the columns that have to do with the rows that were changed. And when we do an insert into books here, like we're only changing one row, which is the book that we're inserting into the table. So when we do returning star, we're basically just saying, give us all of the details on the row that we just inserted into the table.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. All right. So that's that. We put async on here. All right, last thing up is the delete, which we have the try here, delete from books, where ID is equal to $1, returning star with the ID. We've got to do an await here, and this is going to be async. Then if we run into any issues, we just res.status 404, and we say that the book cannot be found. So give that a save, go back here, and let's go ahead and get rid of the Martha Stewart cookbook. If we send it, we get ID 1, title Martha Stewart cookbook. If we try running this delete request again, we see error, the book cannot be found. Because if we do a get request for all of our books, we can see there is no longer the book with the ID of 1. And so it seems like with all of that, we've got a working CRUD database that's able to perform actions on our books. We could try to expand this out a little bit more by adding a couple different columns, but we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about migrations, where we can make changes to a database that already exists, and we can add additional details onto the existing data.
Question.
Yep.
Why didn't it reshuffle it back to the first book in that row to be ID 1?
Because when we use the IDs in Postgres, it doesn't shift the order of the IDs, because if it shifted the order of the IDs, it would mean that like every single row would have to be updated every time you update a row. And that's like really performance heavy. So it doesn't do that. And beyond that, so take, for example, if you deleted an item with like that particular ID, right? That like if you were a user that had a book with an ID of 1, if you deleted that book with an ID of 1, you don't want that book to get replaced with another book, right? You don't want that like another book to now have an ID of 1 and for you to own that book. You want that book to just like be completely cleared away and for other books to just stay where they are, right?
I guess I would just think that now it's added the database, like just tying the numbers to the actual rows that they're in would happen, but I guess
It's like that seems intuitive, but the key reason why like the IDs still stay where they're at and they don't change after you like get rid of something before it is because like IDs are generally used for what we call like the foreign keys, right? We talked about this like 2 weeks ago, where like we can use IDs in different tables to refer to like different to different rows in different tables, right? So take, for example, if like we had another table for like let's say library patrons or like people who go to like libraries, whatever you want to call them, right? If our patron table had like a foreign key column to say like, hey, this is the book that they currently have checked out. If we were to delete that book, we don't want to update like a book to now have that new ID, right? Because it's entirely possible that like they checked out a book that doesn't exist anymore. Not that we're updating that book to now be a different book. You get what I'm saying?
that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. So that deals with that. Does anyone else have any other questions on the different CRUD actions that we can do using like a SQL database and how we have this set up using PGPromise? Any questions at all? Once, going twice. All right, then can I see in chat like how are people feeling about the use of like PGPromise and like integrating that into like Express? Like scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable do people feel with like the code that we just wrote? Like, did it make sense? Like, do you feel like you guys could do it on your own? 1 being like absolutely no idea what just happened, 10 being like feeling pretty confident you could like take on the world with this. 6, not bad. 7 out of 10. 7, is pretty good. Pretty good. All right, anyone else? 5, it's not too bad. A little bit more practice would be good. 6, 7. All right, awesome. Cool. Made a lot of sense, but wouldn't be able to do on your own yet. All right, that's fine. Totally fine. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with this, and we're going to look at more complex relations. And in this case, we're going to be working with adding another table to our database so that we can add the ability for people to check out books. And so that's going to be the plan for tomorrow. Yeah, we'll just be adding like complex relation, or I mean, they're not really complex, but like at least relations between like tables and like how to fit that into our application. And honestly, like once we have that figured out, it's entirely optional to learn about ORMs, but once you know how to like work with the database in like any backend language, like that's it for backend. Like we're good. Like you can take this add like React on top of it, and like boom, you're a full stack developer. Like we're basically at the end of like what you need to know to be like functional on the job. So congratulations, y'all have made it this far. And rather than putting it in a zip, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on a repo on GitHub. And I'm going to do that right now. And you guys are going to watch me do it. Status, we'll do git init. Yep, that's right. You guys survived. GitHub. We'll make a. Yeah, I'll make it in the 10-foot%. Actually, just set that here. So owner is going to be 10-foot pursuit. We'll say 0318. Express PGPromise. Make sure. Make it public. No readme. Create the repo. Cool. Then I already do get in it here. I did. So let me go ahead and status. Oh, for that, gotta make a git not in controllers. Outside here, we gotta make a .git ignore so that we don't push our node modules up. Because if we push our node modules up, it's gonna be a lot of stuff. So with that, you see node modules was here, status, node modules is no longer here, which is excellent. So we're good here. And while I'm at it, let me go ahead and go to config.js and say replace with the Postgres user you created and replace with the password you set on that user. Save that. Status, git add dot, git commit -m, and added basic CRUD functionality for book resource. And finally, we can do, oh, we don't have a remote yet. So that's why we got to go here. Copy this, where it'll do git remote add origin, git at github.com, and it gives us the repo link for the place where we can push this to. Paste that in, send it off. Now it's on its way. Give this a refresh. We'll take this. And I will put this up. Well, let me put this in Zoom real quick. And then I'll also put this on Slack. All right. Any last questions either on the use of PGPromise, Express, the software development landscape as a whole? Any questions? All right, going once, twice. Here's the code for the stuff we last day.
Oh, I don't know if my hand did not show.
I can see it. There you go. Go for it.
Oh no, so it's like being where we're at now, basically having all the tools at our fingertips, like just how often should we be drilling ourselves with like day in, day out so we can like really, really appreciate what we've learned so far? Because I know it's been a lot, and I mean we have the totality of like maybe 7 months worth of knowledge at our fingertips, but I'm pretty sure we're all still digesting a lot of different aspects depending what caught us, where we got caught up on, trying not to really forget the things we were good at, because sometimes we don't tend to put as much enforcement there because we thought we were really good at it. So like how often should we really be like practicing our work and whatnot?
That's a great question. And it's really hard to say. It's like, I kind of want to say until you get comfortable with it, but even with me being where I'm at, like I'm like, there are definitely cases where I still don't feel comfortable with like where I'm at in terms of like what I know. So it's like, it's always going to be an ongoing process. It's always going to be like this feeling of like, you have to like learn more and more. Like, if you can get to a point where like you feel confident about like, hey, like you know how like the like take for example React, right? If you have a solid understanding of like, all right, like this is how use state works, this is what happens when you do a render, and like you understand the things under the hood, then like if you're at that point, then you can feel like comfortable with it. If you're at a point where like you can like knock out like a application in like a couple of like so suppose like you had to build like a really simple like CRUD app that's like single page. If you're able to do that in like the course of an hour and like you feel really good about like just being able to like get something working, then like I'd say you're at a good spot. But that question of like where should you stop is it's a difficult question to answer because like there is no end to it. Like it is constantly a journey of learning. And even with like what we've learned so far, this is just like the foundation. Like it's enough to get you functional at like a job and to be able to like produce code that like your employer would need. But at the same time, like there are always new frameworks, there are always new paradigms, there are always new like, I guess like concepts of how should the front end be done or how should the back end be done or how does like computing at like the cloud level work or do we even want to be doing cloud computing, should we be running things back on like on local like servers now. Like that's why it's that important to stay up to date with like what's going on in tech and to see what's going on with like the changes in the landscape. And hopefully that answers the question, even if it's not like an ideal answer.
All right, because I mean, for me, it never was like where to stop. It's like more like how often should we practice? And I know initially when we first started, I think it was like every day.
Oh, well, yeah, like at this point, I would say still continue every day if you can, but
Life happens.
yeah, life does happen. Like take the time that you need, but ideally, like you're gonna want to continue to drill this until you get like really comfortable with like being able to do this.
And I know it sounds like maybe like beating a dead horse like over again, but it's like, and I know that also this changes on a case by case basis, but it's like how often, not how often, but like, should we, let me see how I ask this question. Should we reinforce what we don't feel like we're strong at, or should we reinforce where we do feel strong at? Because I know some people feel stronger on a back end as opposed to a front end. So it's like, what should you think someone should reinforce? Like what they're good at, so that way they can like probably be better prepared for a job in the position they want to work at or what they're looking for, or what they're not good at, so that way they can be more versatile and more marketable when it comes to like actually finding different jobs out there. Because I know job market is very crazy right now and erratic.
Right. My belief, and this is a belief that I see shared across like more like senior engineers, is that like the ideal developer is generally like a jack of all trades and master of like at least one. So I would say like for the stuff that you're not super strong on, try and get to a point where like you're at least functional and like you can get something like passing and like working. But once you're at that point, if you don't want to like focus particularly on that, then like feel free to like dive deeper into like the parts that like you're more comfortable and confident with, and like maybe build your skill set there, and like that way you can market yourself as more of a back-end developer if you're like much more into like the back end, or you can market yourself as a front-end developer if like if like CSS and like React is more your strong suit and you don't like dealing with like the back end and like dealing with like the database and all that.
Okay, thank you. And I think Edgar asked something in chat.
Let me read this. Can we maybe get updates on where we are with Capstone, maybe the job market and outlook, and maybe how impressive we need to be within this market? It's hard to say. Like with Capstone, we're at module 4 right now. So once we finish up with module 4, we're supposed to be moving into module 5, which is data structures and algorithms, and also prepping for just getting you guys like up to speed with everything that we've learned over the year so far. But considering like the direction that we took with this class, and like we've been integrating like front end and back end at the same time throughout a lot of this, there shouldn't be too much that we need to review in terms of like sort of like connecting all the pieces together, but we will be providing some time for that. For capstone, I'd have to talk to management to get some more solid dates on that because things. I'm not sure if we have anything like set in stone right now. I would need to clarify with management. But at least for the job market, from what I hear, like the situation has improved slightly. But like with regards to like what's going on in New York, it may not be a great like situation in terms of like hiring. If you're happy with like potentially like moving like out of state to let's say Indiana or something to work at like a more like local like company like that, you might find like some more luck there. Uh, but it seems to me that a lot of the opportunities are going to be coming from like remote opportunities that like because like just by virtue of like being remote, like you're opening yourself up to like a global market. And if you can like find a job that like does like that is based in like a foreign like country, right? That like maybe that could be like a good move to like make. And that way, like even if like the exchange rate from like a foreign country to USD might be less, you might be able to offset that by moving to like a lower cost of like living area. But in terms of like the overall American job market, it's from what I'm hearing, it's improved a little bit, but it's still an employer's market that they still have like the majority opportunity to say like, hey, like yeah, we're gonna pay you at like 75% of market rate, and we're also gonna have you work like 10 hours a week, and like we're gonna require that you come into the office every day. Like because like the competition for jobs right now continues to be stiff. Like we had a record number of like CS graduates in like coming out from colleges. And at the same time, we've got a record number of like college students who are not employed in like the fields that they like originally trained up for. So in terms of like what the field is looking right now, it's like yeah, not gonna mince words. It's not good, but and maybe there's like some slight improvement in terms of like what's going on right now, but long term, it's really hard to say. I want to avoid being negative, but yeah, like it is what it is. Oh, and Will's reading the digital mindset. Yeah, definitely give the book a look. I might be giving that a look myself. Yeah, thanks for recommendation. Sarah, question?
Did you say that like employers are asking people to come into the office every day? Like, is that like the trend, or like would you say the trend is like more remote or like hybrid or?
Like back during the pandemic, like a lot of companies went remote, and a lot of companies found that their productivity didn't suffer at all. Like after like going remote, it's like maybe in certain cases where like management was like just not there at all, that they saw like some reduction in like the amount of work being done. But even after like seeing those numbers and seeing that like, hey, like there really isn't like a major difference between like having the people come into the office versus like working at home, a lot of employers, honestly Pursuit included, like do want their employees to come into the office for the the openly discussed, or like the I guess like the face of it. On the face of it, they say it's because like, hey, like we want collaboration and we want people to work together, and it's like we can build a community and like build a family of like corporate ismness. I don't know. If like people come into the office and we can see people face to face. But on the other hand, like I'm pretty sure it's just because like there are
Well, it's
corporate
I
what was it?
mean, my personal opinion is like it's office real, like
It's office real estate. It's like 99% it's office real estate.
Right. Like everything else is just kind of more like corporate speak.
Pretty much. Well, Edgar, if that was more hopeful than you expected, then like all right, I gotta stop myself from saying too much, but it's good that you think I'm hopeful. And Monique saying, yeah, sounds like you guys gotta come up with your own jobs and companies. Absolutely. I 100% like support like you guys like going off and like striking it off on your own. It's like the first job that I had like after getting out of college was like co-founding a company. Even though like during that time I basically lived off of like some guy's couch and like ate their leftovers as like a means of sustenance. It like it was not it was a stressful experience, but it accelerated me much more than like I would have like working at like a major company, in my opinion. Even if like I've got maybe like some gaps in knowledge of like, hey, like junior developers generally like learn these things from senior developers, and I ended up learning all that on my own. Like putting yourself in a position where it's like sink or swim is one of like the key ways of like being able to like really internalize that knowledge, because like it really does come down to like if you don't get this done, like yeah. It's like I'm like I would love to hear like whatever like ideas that you guys have for like companies, and like I'm more than happy to provide feedback, provide any sort of like guidance, provide any sort of like mentoring. As someone who's like done a little bit of like work in that space of like I guess like entrepreneurship. So if you guys need any help with that, I am more than happy to like help out with it. Yeah, Carlos.
Would it also be, and this is trying to keep things within the realm of realism, like, is it very possible that we might be working like odd tech jobs here and there for the foreseeable future until we land something really solid? And maybe that's something we should be like looking into, maybe, or like, uh, if a friend or a friend of a friend approaches you being like, oh, hey, I heard that you have a certain set of skills. They're not going to be paying you, probably market prices, because I'm pretty sure like whatever startup or whatever technical work they need you to do is in a much smaller budget. But would it be wise to take those jobs on as a means for the interim while you wait for something bigger to land?
Absolutely. Because like if you're not working on anything at the moment, then like whatever work that you can get, like pick it up. Like it's like depending on like it also depends on like your financial situation and like how badly you need it, of course. But it's like if you're able to like pick up like, paid work, like building out like a friend's website, or like your your uncle wants like a newly revamped website for like their like plumbing business or something, because like they want like better marketing, or like they want like SEO improvements, then like by all means like pick up the job, because that's something that you can like put on the resume, say like, hey, like I do have experience with like pushing like product out into production and like getting this into a state where like people use it, right? That if you can demonstrate that ability to, for lack of a better term, like hustle, right, then like that is something that I believe that recruiters worth their salt would be able to like understand. Yeah. Follow-up question.
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, so, and even if we're not able to pick up these jobs, or maybe because I still am haunted by that story from launch day of the guy who sent like over 300 applications in, and it was after like I don't remember what number that he got finally landed somewhere. Um, but if things aren't looking up on that end, um, it's still wise to try to stack, like, let's say our personal portfolios, or work on like personal projects, or just work on something that keeps us coding, and just anything that keeps us in this mindset that keeps sharpening our knowledge, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And with regards to like the applications, it's like, yeah, like 300 seems about like a fair number. I remember like even like when my company shuttered and I had to find like an actual like paid salary job, I was applying to like 10 jobs a day, and I kept a spreadsheet of like all the jobs that I had applied to make sure that I wasn't like double posting to the same job. Because what better way to like get your application like just like basically cut if like a recruiter sees that you've sent the same application in twice, right? So it's like I ended up applying to like near 100 jobs, which is still sort of like chump change for the number of applications that you've got to make, but it really does require persistence, like to get that first job, even if like end up, because like even getting to a point where you're like on a phone call with somebody at the company is already like hard enough. Like, so it's like it's gonna take a lot of persistence and like a lot of applying to at least get some sort of response back. So it's
Yeah.
like I'm just saying that too, so that like people have an expectation of like what to look out for and like how that application process is going to be. Yep. It's like who knows? Maybe like one thing about Pursuit is like Pursuit's got connections to a lot of philanthropic organizations. And in philanthropic organizations, you've got a lot of people who, are lifetime investors, like career investors. And maybe through those connections, you can find some investment dollars. Who knows? I would definitely talk to like, if you don't go into the office too much, but you do want to try and like make a go of like, maybe starting your own company and seeing where like you could potentially make that go. Maybe talk to Juke and Carolyn. It's like they're much more on like the business end than like I've been. So it's like they might have like some perspective that like I might like be missing out on. Sarah?
Does the government like is the private sector looking different from like, for example, like if you want to work like, in at a government job post, or
That's
does it?
an excellent question. It's like for government jobs, I believe many of them have like some requirements on like certifications, and then like they've got like a much more well-defined like structure for like what their pay scales look like. And I believe that at government jobs, they also have like particular exams that you take to evaluate like either your qualifications for the job or like the pay scale at which like you'll be coming into the job. So things are much more, I guess, like structured, like when you're applying to government jobs, also depending on like the government, because I know for sure New York State, or even like New York City has like different like exams for like different jobs, right? Like there are exams for like plumbing, for police officer, firefighter, all that. And even for like tech workers, like if you're trying to become like a programmer for like the city of New York, chances are likely that there's like a numbered test for like the city of New York for that. If we're talking at like the state level, like I would have to dig in a little bit more into that. At the federal level, I believe that it's a little bit more holistic in the sense that they don't make you take like a full-on test, but like they still do look at like basically like your qualifications and come up with like a point ranking system. It's much less like a judgment call and much more like a structured like, it's like I believe it's a much more structured system when like they're employing from the government versus in the private sector. It's much more on like, hey, like does the hiring manager like your like resume, or like do like the members of like the engineering team, like when they looked at your resume, did they feel like, yeah, we can talk to this person?
Understood. Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem at all. Any other questions? All right, going once, going twice. With that being said, we'll go ahead and call it here. Oh, Sarah, one more question.
Yeah, I appreciated this conversation, and I wanted to ask like if we could have more of these types of conversations like from time to time. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Like honestly, considering that we're towards the end of like the required like technical like material, like we might just like spend more time talking about like the state of the market, like what tech skills are like in demand, and like talk more about like the state of development rather than like the like, I mean, we'll still be talking about the nitty-gritty in terms of like, hey, like if let's say for example Winter.js, which is like a runtime that like, which is another like competitor to like Node.js, I guess, that like, hey, maybe this is worth learning. Maybe we'll spend a little bit of time like diving into technical details of this, so that like when you guys maybe have a technical conversation with like a recruiter or like a hiring manager or an engineer at a company, that like you'll be able to say like, oh yeah, we talked about this in class. Like we had a discussion, we talked about these different like runtimes, and like it's kind of dumb, or like I kind of like this. It's like that way like we can start, I guess, like honing like your guys's like maybe viewpoints or opinions, or like even like understand or we can expose you guys to a much broader range of topics in software development now. And through that exposure, I think it should help in terms of like, I don't want to say like signaling like your ability to like employers, but like in a sense that is sort of like what's going on when we're talking about like new technologies and everything. But that just happens to be like something that's needed in like the industry nowadays.
Yeah, like it just seems like the zeitgeist changes kind of quickly. So like kind of knowing what's going on with the job market and just the tech industry in general. Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
super helpful. Thank you so much.
Yep, no problem at all. All right. And with that, we'll call it here for today. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about how to do some cross-table communications by connecting like one table to another table through the use of foreign keys and what that would look like in an application. So we'll be introducing some new resources and we'll see where we can go from there. With that being said, have a great night, everyone. I'll be in office hours right about